There we go. Okay, so we are on where is the page number 195? And the title of this chapter is Depression. It's by somebody named John Dorbauer. I'm not familiar with that name. He's in Germany. And Elaine, you're going to take it away, right?
Yes. I was about 9. My mom was very depressed, and I felt I was responsible for keeping her jovial and happy. So I played a good clown. But it was pretty stressful. I was very shy, extremely shy all the time. But somehow I managed to keep her relatively happy and buoyant. At least that was my impression. I worked hard in school, played lots of sports. I even had quite a few friends, but was constantly worried and sad that my mom was always very low and depressed. I wanted to help her. I was diagnosed with depression when I was 14 or 15 and given pills by the family doctor. In those days, you just gave people a few pills and hoped that they felt better. I didn't like taking them as they just made me feel really tired. I was fortunate to study theology at Oxford University. Then I went to Durham University and did a postgraduate course. My first therapist was a teacher in one of the colleges. He was sort of teaching me the idea of positive thinking. I read about a million books on it, so I was kind of an expert. But even positive thinking didn't help. After college, I moved to Italy and then Germany. I was always keen to find a sort of magic bullet, a magical formula to feel better. I tried TM, NLP, and CBT. I had a few psychotherapists who told me I had a chemical imbalance and would take me back to my past, but that never made me feel good. In fact, I would feel dreadful. I did some really off-the-wall stuff. One was really weird. It was called Avatar. It was to do with the belief system change. I thought I'd screwed up beliefs. I had this sort of continual voice in my head saying, "You're no good. You've got nothing to say. Why bother? You're a fraud." I hooked onto these and the thought that they were real. Then I found the 3 principles and did coaching with loads of people who were extremely kind and willing to help. But I was so determined to stick to my very analytical way of dealing with thinking, which doesn't really help if you're trying to have a new experience. So I was very critical of the principles at first. I argued my case a lot. I argued with Michael Neal, with George Pransky, Dick and Benchinger, and Steve Chandler. The problem was that I was trying too hard to get it. My mind was going so fast trying to work it out. It was like an electric fan. I read about people who had mind-blowing, illuminating experiences, and I thought, oh, bloody hell, why can't I get it? Which made me feel worse. Remember, I just wanted to feel better. I thought it was something to get, to conceptually understand, and it's really not like that. Then I got to the end of my tether. I was really depressed, and I had enough of life. Life and all this and these horrible thoughts. I used to have terrible nights when I woke up in the middle of the night and I just didn't sleep. It was a living nightmare. It was more doom, hopelessness. I was extremely tired. I was lethargic. I was worried and concerned all the time with all the same thoughts again. You're a waste of space. It's never going to work. Then I saw a film with Jack Pransky. I thought, well, this guy might have something to say. So I called him. And of course, I argued with him. I said, I'm really not very happy. I'm very depressed. Is there anything you could suggest? And Jack said, well, I don't know what to do with you, John. I think we need to get the big guns. I can't get through to you. And then he said, I'll have a word with a mate of mine, Bill. I ended up talking to Dr. Bill Pettit, and we got one of Syd Banks' books and started reading it. You know, it's been a process. It's been a relatively long process. I never had this sort of boom with white lights. But what did come to me was that I saw that I was creating my world through the thinking I have. I finally realized that, and that's pretty big. Even though sometimes I have bad days, another day would be a good day, you know? Bad days, good days. And even if I'm in a low mood, I know that that's not long term. So at the end of the day, my life has changed on the outside. But I just don't feel worried about it anymore. I don't feel worried about money. I'm not depressed, and I feel hope. I used to find it very difficult to make friends. Now I don't. I have friends. I have some very good friends. My work is better than it was before because I'm just not worried about it. Looking back to when I studied theology, it is only now through the three principles that I started to understand how we create our experience of life via our consciousness that activates thoughts. Basically, it's what all of the great religions have been talking about. Children have this very much in the moment experience. Kids can get into a really, really bad mood and they hit their brother 1 minute and then the next minute they're all love and light again. I think the idea to be in the here and the now, that is to me is a very large part of what the principles are talking about. The kingdom of heaven is within you. So the whole idea of not needing to search for something outside, like the Porsche, or the big mansion or the gold, doesn't make sense anymore. It's just an amazing insight to have these three principles, which really clarify the whole of what religion is, what true religion is talking about. Like Syd said, we don't have to be afraid of our own experience.
I love how he said at the top of the page, he would have thoughts like, you're a waste of space. It's never going to work.
Yeah.
You know, there's all these things wrong with you. And then he realizes, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling my own thoughts. But that didn't look like thoughts to him. That looked like reality until he realized that that's thoughts. And these thoughts come and go. It's not reality that's coming and going. It's our take on reality. Just love that. You know, it's like you have your glasses on top of your head and you're looking all over for your glasses. Right?
Right.
All right. So I'll do the next one. Depression again with Zia in India. I'm a 28-year-old IT professional living in Chennai, India. In April 2017, I had a car accident. I had just graduated as an engineer back then. I felt some jerk in my knee during the accident, but I was okay and I moved on with my life looking for career options. 1 month later, I was crossing the road and suddenly I felt something snap in my knee. It felt like something tore or broke. There was swelling and it was very painful. I visited a traditional healer and he mentioned I had a ligament tear in my knee. The treatment took 2 to 3 months. After 6 to 7 visits, the knee didn't bend and it was very uncomfortable. So I saw an orthopedic doctor. He said I had a meniscus tear. I underwent knee surgery followed by physiotherapy for 3 months. I didn't know what to do with my career. I had judgment about an IT job. I started thinking IT was for average people. In 2018, I joined my dad in his family business. I used to get annoyed very easily. I was restless and impatient with people at home and in my day-to-day affairs. Then I took an internship with a startup high-tech company. I noticed I had issues in focusing. I used to think a lot and I had severe headaches. I thought I could have done better with my life. I am stuck and not doing well enough. I saw a psychiatrist. She said, don't make any decisions. It was like I was stuck in a loop and I had to think my way out of it to get rid of the uncomfortable feelings that I'm stuck in life, unable to move forward. I would spend days ruminating in bed, waiting for an idea to pop up that would change my situation. I'd want to know everything that's happening or meant to happen and predict the future like everything was under my control. I was always angry or sad. I would judge, be critical of my little efforts, and give up easily. The effect of that was that I wouldn't talk to anyone. I wouldn't socialize with people or go out much. I would just go to work and back home. I was cut off from my friends, the friends I used to love being with, and my family. At one point in time, I was even angry and aggressive with my family. I was sleeping a lot. I lost weight and I became very thin. My diagnosis was mild depression with the habit of thinking obsessively, ruminating. It was so intense that I would get headaches thinking about made up scenarios. Ruminating became a habit that I didn't notice, and my headaches became more frequent. I would be caught up in my thinking most of the time, and my body was giving signals, and my emotions were always turbulent. I was on bupropion, fluoxetine, risperidone, quetiapine, and half of these meds I haven't even heard of. Armodafinil, maybe that, that's in India. At different phases of treatment, I tried cognitive behavioral therapy to become cognizant of my thinking patterns. I started meditating regularly to stay more focused. I found the three principles through Mohammed Mudassir Altaf, who is a life coach. He suggested I read The Inside Out Revolution by Michael Neal, and eventually I took up coaching sessions with him and gained awareness of the principles. I began working with him from 2020 onwards until 2022. My insights for that: we're always okay, and it's the quality of thoughts that determine our reality at any point in time. Although I have uncomfortable thoughts now and then, I'm aware they're just thoughts that I'm having, and it's up to me to believe them or not. Becoming more aware of thoughts and the feelings they bring out has made me a much more understanding and calmer person. I now understand that there's nowhere better to be or anything to become than embracing the present moment fully. I learned three very important things. One, I thought I was either inherently good at something or I am not. I realized we are all capable of learning new skills and acquiring knowledge. That's true for me too. Two, I am okay, and everybody is okay. My situations don't determine my self-worth. We are all okay the way we are. There is nothing to fix or change in life. I learned to accept myself the way I was without judgment. And by the way, even though these are 3 points, this is not the three principles. This is her insights gained by her understanding of how the principles, mind, thought, and consciousness work within everybody to create a feeling, a sensation of reality. I used to think I had to make the best, this is number 3 for her. I used to think I had to make the best possible move to have a new life. I realized no amount of thinking or figuring out will equal living in the present. I can't, and I don't have to figure out my life. I realized I didn't have to think so much. I just have to do what I do with presence and awareness. And that number 3 was the big insight I had back in 1985. Yeah, what a difference it makes to have really deep insights like this. The relationships that I have, this is Zia, and the time I spend doing things at work and at home are enjoyable now. I'm not worried about outcomes. Now I work in a leading IT company in India. My work and responsibilities have increased over a period of time. Now I manage project outcomes with the responsibility of managing people. That's a big shift for me. I had never been a people leader before. I travel for work. I've started to take care of my body. I do volunteering during my free time teaching underprivileged children, and I support visually challenged people by teaching them English. I play an active role at home financially and physically. Now, my life is peaceful and simpler. The quality of my life is really nice. Wow. Oh, here's Mary. I'll let Mary in. You want to go with the next chapter, Elaine?
Neurodevelopmental Disorders, a conversation with Dr. Willen F. Pettit, Jr., MD, retired psychiatrist, board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry in Neurology and Adult Psychiatry, Geriatric Psychiatry, Adolescent Psychiatry, Psychosomatic Medicine, Addiction Medicine, adjunct professor, Creighton University. Chana Stodley, thank you. Dr. Pettit, for talking with us again. Please see the chapter on psychotic disorders for Dr. Bill Pettit's full and extensive professional bio. Something I often heard you say is that at the core of every human being is love. I was wondering if we could start there. Instead of neurodiversity being how different we all are, can we start by looking at what everybody has in common? Dr. Pettit, I'll give it my best shot because that's quite a statement to make. When I think about that statement and then think about what understanding neural processors speaks to, it is necessary to understand the entire system. As with all systems, whether it's economics, whether it's medicine, whether it's gravity or electricity, if you don't understand the whole system, its nature, its attributes, and how it works, how it manifests, it's unlikely that you will hurt yourself or someone else with that system. It is also quite likely that you'll be able to utilize that system to its fullest capacity when you do understand it. A lot of people think of the three principles as psychological principles, but Syd said over and over that these principles are not of this world. They are universal principles. Now, yes, they inform psychology, but they also inform physics. They inform everything. Dig Bozian, a psychiatrist and friend of mine, was the director of training at British Aerospace Electronics, based in New Hampshire. George Pransky and Associates had been consulting to BAE for a number of years when a group of PhD physicists employed by BAE came to Dick and asked him to hire Syd Banks to present a program just for the physicists. Dick indicated to me that he decided to attend the program as he was fascinated to hear what Syd would present to those theoretical physicists from the acclaimed Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Syd Banks started the program by discussing the metaphor of universal principles of universal mind, universal consciousness, and universal thought. He then began pointing out how they applied to physics, explaining that because Einstein didn't understand infinity, his formulas were really not precise. Dick told me he suddenly felt quite insecure. I kind of jumped up and said, "Oh, Syd, why don't you tell us a little more about the principles in psychology?" However, 4 or more of the physicists stood up quickly, asking Dick to sit down so they could listen to what he had to say, as it was clear to them that he was onto something. After listening to Syd for 3 days, a representative from the physicists came to Dick requesting that Syd be hired to come back to present for 3 additional days. Syd came again, and I recently interviewed one of those physicists for nearly 2 hours. He spoke of how meeting Syd changed his life to a much gentler experience. Syd frequently pointed out that the universal principles are a metaphor for the energy of all things, either formless or in form. Syd Banks spoke of immutable spiritual laws which govern the universe. Syd Banks posits that he was given to describe them as universal mind, universal consciousness, and universal thought. When Syd Banks capitalizes a term like love or truth, he is referring to universal governing divine principles. Some people will feel most comfortable referring to that principle as God, while others would find that word offensive. Words don't do well at describing the formless, the nature, and the attributes of what people call God. But all 3 of these universal principles are the same thing. All of creation is seen as a manifestation of this formless universal principle into form. Human beings are separated from plants and animals in that we have been gifted not only personal use of these principles, but also the ability to be a spectator in the process, in that we can become aware of what we are at the core of our being, and that we are using these universal principles of mind, consciousness, and thought to navigate through this experience on earth that we call life. No 2 people are alike or identical to anyone else, but are all utilizing the same innate gifts. Wow, that was a mouthful. It appears clear to me that every human being is, moment to moment, either up in their thoughts or present in their life. Given that as humans we have been given freedom of thought and free will, we can choose to be present in more and more of our lives. So Chana, so we have free will to do that? Bill, I think so. Some researchers in human behavior have concluded that humans do not have free will and freedom of thought, but that both are biologically and environmentally determined. There's a grain of truth in that statement. For example, 1. It is true for the plant and even animal kingdoms because they both lack the personal use of free will. 2. Humans who do not have a sufficient understanding of nature and attributes of these universal principles will not have the freedom to utilize them. They will be like plants and animals and have their behavior determined by their past experiences, their genetic variability, their life challenges, social support, socioeconomic state, etc. An example would be the hypothetical case of a person in poverty who has a pair of shoes that unknowingly has a $5 million certified check sewn into the sole of the shoe. The person walks through life as a millionaire without the knowledge he or she is very rich. Chana, that's a great metaphor. So how do you see this relating to neurodiversity? Bill, it's all about a feeling state. As an individual experiences realization from a spiritual wisdom at the core of every human being, they experience a positive feeling state more often, which brings with it an incremental understanding of the nature and attributes of the formless form system of creation and life. Operating from this feeling state, people experience a freedom of thought and a free will that others will have, but not be aware that they do. And in my experience of 80 plus years of living and 50 plus years as a psychiatrist, a person who trusts the spiritual wisdom based guidance system will live more often in a state of non judgment, love, gratitude, blessing, regardless of their neuroprocessor, i.e., brain, genetic makeup, or past experiences. Chana, amazing. What are you pointing to? What you are pointing to is that no matter how your brain works, the more we understand how it works, the better state of mind we will be in, and so the better we can use whatever type of brain or processor we have been given. So, in terms of neurodiversity, one of the things I really loved hearing you say when you talked about ASD, autism spectrum disorder, is that if a spectrum starts at 0, then we are all on that spectrum. It has to include all of us. So there's actually infinite neurodiversity. It's not about good or bad, it's a continuum. There are no two human beings that have ever lived on Earth who have the same brain on that continuum. Bill, yes. What I'm saying is that all of us at the core of our being are formless, intelligent, conscious, creative, divine energy that powers our brain, computer, and body as a vehicle and operating system to utilize as we navigate this experience called life. No two people have the same computer operating system. And in fact, how we utilize the power of principle of thought has been clearly shown to create changes in the structure, neural circuits, mitochondrial function of each of our 50 trillion cells, rates of cell deaths, neuroplasticity, formation of our new brain cells, microbiome balance in our bowels, neurotransmitters, receptors, immune function, dysfunction, cytokine, influence on immune function, epigenetic changes, genes being turned off and others being turned on, etc., etc. Chana, wow, that makes sense. I once heard Deepak Chopra call the immune system a traveling nervous system, so it makes sense that it would affect so many parts of the body. Bill, in recent years, there has been research done at 7 centers around the world conducting sophisticated exploration of the brains of 11,000 identical twins. The study demonstrated that the brains of identical twins became disparate very quickly. The structure and the neurocircuitry in their brains changed because they were using it in different ways. We often express this by saying they were using their minds differently. That is, they were using the spiritual, formless power of mind, consciousness, and thought uniquely, thus creating a thought-created psychological experience. Thought-informed physiological changes in both our computer brain and every cell and every organ in our body affect every system in our body. One example is that even the slight differences in the beat of our heart are referred to as heart rate variability. This variability is the heart's electrical system responding uniquely with each beat to that instant physiological need. In the cardiovascular system, loss of this heart rate variability is a measurable sign of a cardiovascular system that is in trouble. Every system of our body and brain has similar systems, signs of healthy versus unhealthy functioning. Chana. The body clearly has ways of letting us know what it needs, like hunger pains mean eat something. Sweating means we are hot. But the mind also has ways of sending us signals to get our attention. Bill, yes, exactly. Our psychological system is always giving us feedback on the state of our psyche. It manifests in one, our mood, feeling level. It ranges from lighthearted and loving to hopelessness and despair. Two, our tension, feeling level from contentment, peace to overwhelming anxiety, leading to alarms such as phobias, panic attacks, and brain behavioral responses such as obsessive recurrent thoughts and compulsive urges to act with rituals of cleaning, checking, organizing, hair pulling, skin picking, fire setting, unhealthy eating habits, etc., in an attempt to modulate the anxiety. Number three, our computer, brains, stored information, and life experience are utilized in harmony with our being's spiritual wisdom to create a life of happiness, contentment, creativity, productivity, and loving relationships to our brain, computer's output, experienced as the person's identity or as something that needs to be regulated or that has the power to cause havoc to one's well being, thus, a desire to find a way to disconnect and distance oneself from the content of one's thinking through such practices as meditation, yoga, exercise, or less adaptively by the use of dissociative drugs such as ketamine, ecstasy, LSD, etc., ECT, deep brain stimulation, repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, RTMs, CS, Chana. So all these signals, mood, tension, and maladaptive behaviors are actually signals trying to get our attention to slow down and come back to homeostasis. Bill, yes, because our bodies generally respond to peace with healthy functioning. Some scientists believe that we are hardwired to live about 115 years. I noted recently that a woman in France died at 118 years of age. It is clear from thousands of research articles that the experience of chronic mental stress is markedly detrimental to one's health, morbidity, and early mortality. Examples easily noted are the fact that people diagnosed with schizophrenia, experiencing considerable chronic mental stress, or those with 6 or more adverse childhood events, ACEs, die approximately 20 years earlier than their peers. Chana. Stress is shortening their lives. So let's bring this back to ADHD or the ADHD spectrum, for example. Bill, yes. So the idea of a spectrum is saying if you have billions and billions of brains, you'll start to see, well, there's a spectrum of different things. You know, if I look around my office, I have piles and piles of paper, but my wife would never have a pile in her office. Haha. I wouldn't say I have ADHD, but the brains we all have are affected by how we use them. Let's take identical twins. One of them comes to the understanding of the principles, or like Viktor Frankl and Nelson Mandela, people who just knew it instinctively. Let's say that one twin spent 25 minutes a day in a stressful thinking, and the rest of the time they were in a quiet state of mind. But the other identical twin was spending 14 to 15 hours a day in worry, guilt, resentment, and upset. Within a very short period of time, their processors, their brains would be very, very different. Chana, so you are pointing to the role of stressful thinking underlying these diagnoses? Bill, in my experience, just about everybody, if they get stressed enough, could easily meet the criteria for ADHD. They will start having trouble with inattention. They will start having trouble with distractibility. They will have trouble completing tasks, etc. One of the things that really came to me one time was when I had a patient with severe ADHD. I needed to increase her dose 50%. I think maybe to 50 milligrams of Ritalin. methylphenidate. And when she came back 4 weeks later, she said, well, Dr. Pettit, the medicine is just not working. I'm just as stressed as I was before, even with this 50% increase. So I started smiling. I said, okay, well, tell me about the last 4 weeks. She says, this bad thing happened, and then my brother got sick. And my good friend was in a car accident, and I got into all this, stressful thinking about this and that. And wow, the names all the she names all these very challenging things, and I'm just listening. I said, well, based on where you were 4 weeks ago, how much more stressful thinking do you think you have? What percentage? Like 10%? More? 15%? Oh, she said, no, it's probably 50% more. I sat there and I said, I increased your medicine by 50%. Your medicine has been working hard to do what it does, but you increased your stressful thinking by 50%. It's a wash. Would you expect that you'd be feeling 50% better with this? Do you see that? Chana, it seems pretty clear when you explain it like that. Bill, we're literally creating the physical structure of our brain, the neurocircuitry, all the time. We also create our experience by our understanding of these principles. So if you understand that this system of life is created by beneficent, pure love and understanding, power, that you are that intelligence, you are that divine thought system, then, as Syd says, there would be no mental illness other than the inability to understand the power of thought. He's using a capital T here, the principles of thought. Chana, can you explain that a little more in terms of how our minds work? Bill, well, if all you have is an analytical mind, you're screwed. If all you have is your analytical thinking and you don't have a connection to the fact that you are a spiritual being, that this is your second home, and when you die, you're going back to where you came from. If all you have is your personal mind, and you don't realize that the personal mind is kind of a subset of the universal mind that you're using to create an experience and navigate your way through this thing we call life. If you don't understand the whole system and the processor or brain that you're given, you're going to be at the mercy of your own processor rather than using your processor to its fullest potential.
I'm going to give you a break for a second, Elaine. This is
Okay.
a really long chapter.
Yeah.
Do
Intense.
you want me to take over from here?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
that'll be good. I don't want you to get a sore throat with all these pages. But I mean, that's so profound, bless his heart. Bill, the psychiatrist, 80 plus years old. I think this is his 83rd year. And he's really seen a lot.
Mhm.
Okay, so Chana says, I just realized something. I often suggest to clients that they slow down, but understanding that they have a different processor than I do, it's not that they have to go at my speed or what society or the education system says is normal. They just need to understand what their best speed is so they can be happy, function well, and live a fulfilling life. Understanding this makes the difference between a life of disability and stigma or fulfillment and peace? Question she's asking. And Bill answers yes. I'm sure, I've seen this working with people with ADHD. My daughter, who has ADHD, for example, graduated high school with a 1.67 SAT score, US equivalent of an F. But because she understands how her brain works, she is now a brilliant, award-winning 911 dispatcher. I love it. Chana says, wow, that's amazing. She found a way to use her particular processor to serve her community and live a fulfilling life. And Bill says, yes, hers was the only country out of 55 that had a perfect score in their record keeping. So your state of mind matters. We're all given a processor. There's no doubt when I was at the state hospital with people with very low IQ of 35, the average is 100. Well, those people still went in and out of moods. They went in and out, and when they were in a low mood, they were depressed, angry, and reactive. But they were depressed at an IQ level of 35. And when they were at peace and full of joy, they were incredibly loving and kind, like any other human being. Chana, how lovely. This is something I've heard you say about feelings and ASD, that people with autism are overwhelmed with feelings to the point where it can be very uncomfortable. Bill says, I think there's truth in it. There is a wonderful book called Born for Love. What he's saying is that people with an autism processor have a massive amount of input as far as thoughts. I mean, there are people who have ADHD kind of symptoms and are on the spectrum. I was auditing a professional coach training course recently, and there were people there who were still struggling with the content of their thinking and wanting to do something with it. Some of them were more distressed by the amount of content they were thinking than some patients I've known on the spectrum who came to understand the principles and how the system works. These patients had seen they could be okay with the content and the speed of their thinking, and so had very little to do with it. They just let it do what it does, and so were peaceful and content. They know that their mind is in charge of the brain and that it can tell it to stop spurting out content. They know that it's powering it and that they are not their brain. They're not their thoughts. They will say things like, well, I thank my brain for sharing its comments. I realize that even people on the spectrum can be in harmony with their wisdom. In fact, there are people on the spectrum who have insights and save businesses millions of dollars because they experience things outside the box, right? Chana says that's brilliant. It's so inspiring when neurodiversity is seen as an asset. Bill says we're all given a processor. And that's what's so powerful about this understanding, that when people begin to understand and not just kind of believe we're spiritual beings having a human experience, but they know that they're not their thinking, that they're not any of the content that is spewed out from their computer. That, as Syd said, you can only spew out what's been put in, but it spews it out at different speeds in different flavors. And if people don't know they're not their thinking, it's easy to get frightened. Chana says, and teachers and parents and well-meaning therapists and doctors who don't understand get frightened into reacting and pathologizing. Bill says it can take a lot of understanding for somebody who has had that rapid, incredibly powerful creative process. It'd be like winning a prize for a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. If you are not used to driving a car that has 2,000 horsepower, you'd likely get in an accident with it. It's quite true. I drove my stepbrother's Ferrari for 2 blocks before I said, I can't handle this. And I had to let him take over. It's like, oh my God, a bullet. So then Chana says, while you're talking, I got this image of 2 spectrums. We talk about the autism spectrum, but there's a spectrum of understanding the processor we have, right? So I think most people see the autism spectrum as an indicator of IQ or functioning. For example, highly functioning to average, to not functioning well, all the way to nonverbal, like an ability spectrum almost. But listening to you, I see we all have a different processor, and there's a spectrum of how to use it, live with it, and adapt to it. And like your Lamborghini example, there could be a lot of suffering if we don't understand how it works. But that is also true of any person who doesn't understand how their mind works. Bill says exactly. There were people on this course this week who were suffering as much, if not more, than people on the spectrum who have some understanding. And because they understand the system, not frightened by the content of their thinking. You've heard me tell this story before. It's a little tangential, but I think it's very relevant to the message of this book. A research project had 100 people who had recovered from depression with cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and 2 years later had not had any relapse. And they had another 100 people that they found that had recovered with CBT, but then they had all relapsed. Now the CBT theory is that we're going to lessen the amount of your negative thinking by not catastrophizing as much, not as generalizing as much, etc. So they did all the measurements of these two groups, thinking, of course, the people who relapsed were going to have more negative thinking than the people who didn't. But it wasn't true. And they were shocked. It blew away the theory of cognitive behavioral therapy. Chana says, I have heard you say many times that we can't be broken. I've repeated this to clients, but I'm seeing more and more why this is true. I just remembered a conversation I had recently with a client with cancer, and we saw that awareness can't get sick. Consciousness can't get sick. Consciousness is before the formation of thoughts, and that's where we really are. Bill says that's right. Syd would say that soul and consciousness are the same. And the core of consciousness is pure love. And that's why we can say that at the core of every human being is love. We can identify with our thoughts, we can identify with our body, and the body can get sick. That doesn't mean that we have to identify that that is us. We can identify with a label that somebody has given us, that we're bipolar or we're OCD, but that only tells us where we are rather than who we are. So we have the power to use this gift of thought to identify with a whole lot of things that aren't us. I think your point is brilliant. We can either know that we are consciousness with the ability to go within with omni-intelligence, with the divine thought system, and the ability to use the power of thought in a creative way, or we start thinking that we are our thoughts, or that we are our body, or some labels somebody has given us. I think your point is brilliant, because when we identify with what we truly are, we act from there. Does anybody want to finish up? That's another 2 pages. Everybody's on mute. That leaves me and you, Elaine. Do you want to finish up?
I'll pick up. Hannah, so
Okay.
the other thing you just mentioned is labels. I was just thinking about something that Derek said to me when he was telling his dyslexia story for this section. Like many people, he didn't get his diagnosis until much later in life. People often say getting a diagnosis explains so much for them that previously meant life was very confusing. They often say that they get relief from getting the diagnosis, but what I'm seeing is actually helping them is that they've had an insight into how their brain and mind work. Derek has had amazing insights that have transformed his world. A label has no intrinsic curative abilities. Like a cast put onto a broken bone has no medicinal qualities. A label in and of itself can't give relief or cure anything. It's just a word written in a file somewhere. But the insight it brings is what does the healing. So what's actually happened is that the new information has shifted some thinking about how the person understands themselves, and that new level of understanding brings comfort, clarity, and self-compassion. What I see happening a lot is that because someone, a doctor, a therapist, or even self-diagnosing off the internet, has helped shift their thinking about themselves, it's given them an easier time understanding their particular processor. Bill, I think what you say is true. but now they're identifying themselves as a label, as being ADHD or a dyslexic person. And I bet there are things that people with dyslexia can do better than others, but reading is not one of them. Chana says, yes, I think it was Dr. James Davies in the book Sedated, where he reported that the initial euphoria of getting a diagnosis is often followed by deflation or even depression as people take on the diagnosis as an identity. Stigma, disability, and separation start to stamp out any relief that came from the initial insight. Bill, yes. When people identify with their state of mind, their diagnosis, or their ability to read, for example, they start thinking that, who are they? Rather than where are they? Or where they are. I think it's a mistake. Now, what is true is that some people have a lot of trouble reading. But my experience is when those people get more help and understanding, they improve and can live fulfilling lives. Chana says, yes, they are not their diagnosis. I'm sure if Derek and the others had gotten more help and support earlier on at school, things could have been different. Bill, the three principles are a metaphor. Syd Banks says it came to him as a way to try to explain the connection between our spiritual nature, our formless nature, and our thought-created psychological nature. He said, I didn't think these up. They came to me. I saw the system, and then I was given the gift of this metaphor as a way to try to point to what I had seen. He once said, the divine truth that lies within each living soul never changes. It's eternal. The divine passes from the formless to the form, and as human beings, we are both spectators and participants in this spiritual theater called life. The great mystics who tried to explain this had no choice but to speak in metaphors. Knowing their words were only a representation of the spiritual wisdom that lies within the consciousness of all human beings. Whether they've been labeled dyslexic or autistic or ADHD, all human psyches are rooted in universal truth. No person's psyche is better than any other, only to the degree of the individual psychological and spiritual understanding does it appear to vary. Chana. And the time we have left, there's something we haven't covered about neurodiversity that you'd like to say or point out? Bill, well, I think it's always good to go back to the basics, that there is spiritual wisdom within the consciousness of all human beings, regardless of their processor. That's just beyond what you know, and you don't have to believe it. But I know, in my heart, I know it's true. Some believe the brain and the mind are the same, and that the brain is in charge. But there has to be a power behind the brain. The brain is biological. The mind is spiritual. The brain acts like a computer. Whatever you put into it, you get out, Syd said. Universal mind and the personal mind are not two minds thinking differently, but two ways of using the same mind. And then there's that bold statement that every human being has the ability to harmonize their personal mind with the impersonal mind. Chana. So another way of saying that is every human being has the ability to harmonize their personal processor or their computer mind, no matter what its limitations or capabilities with their divine spiritual nature. Bill says, yes. Understanding neurodiversity is about being open to the possibility that every human being has that ability, the ability to harmonize the personal mind with the spiritual reality that they are at their core. And that's where hope lies. Chana says, thank you.
Wow. I'm going to turn off the recording now so we could have a little discussion about this in the few moments that are left. And the next time when we come back next Wednesday, the next chapter is ADHD by some